You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What happens when burnout forces you to rethink everything? Stay tuned for today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we explore the reality of burnout and what it takes to find healing in high-pressure environments. Drawing from her extensive experience as a nurse, our guest shares her challenges faced on the front lines and how they've shaped her understanding of resilience and self-care. Jenn Johnson is a dedicated registered nurse with over 16 years of experience in emergency rooms across Northern and Southern Ontario, Canada. A frontline worker through the most challenging times, Jenn has witnessed firsthand the intense pressures of the profession, from life and death moments to the struggles of coping during the pandemic. A passionate advocate for nurse well-being, Jenn's new book, Nursing Intuition, was written to support her peers by offering insights on how to reconnect with the love of nursing and foster resilience in a rapidly changing healthcare environment. She's also a wife and mother of two. Here is my interview with Jenn Johnson. Hi, Jenn. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because healing burnout is such an important topic, and I feel like it's high time that we dedicate another episode to burnout. So thanks for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time coming for sure.
Yeah, I feel like this is a topic that so many listeners can benefit from. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't, but I have a feeling that this is a huge thing to talk about. So I'm glad you're here. And for starters, would you like to share with us a little bit about maybe your own journey and how that connects to what you do today, and a little bit about what you do today so our listeners can get to know you?
Yeah, so I'm Jenn Johnson. I'm your token Canadian for the day. I'm out of Hamilton, Ontario. I've been an ER nurse for over 16 years now. I have worked north, south, big hospitals, small hospitals, all the gamut. ER nursing it's thankfully kind of the same everywhere. And so, working and then having COVID hit, you think about the times that you've been depressed previously, the times that maybe you might have been coming close to burnout. Yeah, it was nothing compared to COVID and the fear and anxiety that brought. So for me, when COVID hit, I was working full time in the ER. Everything shut down. So my kids were 4 and 5 at the time. So no daycare. My husband was also essential. So he also had to work Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. And so I worked straight nights and working 2 to 3 days straight at a time, where I would be up all day with the kids. And then I'd be up all night at work. And then I'd be up all day with the kids. And then I'd be up all day at work. And, a couple weeks of that just completely put me into a place where I really shouldn't have been nursing. I should have, taken some time to walk away and get my wits about me. But, back then it was just, it's just going to be a week. It's just going to be 2 weeks. It's just going to be another week. It's, it just kept, lingering, as we all know now. And so I chose to instead, I kind of took a break from the ER. I left the ER to go to the recovery room. So after you have your surgery, you come to recovery room and you hang out for about an hour as you come out of sedation. And then you go back either up to your bed on the floor, or you go home. And at least it was probably the most protected place that you could be in a hospital. Whereas the ER, we had no idea who was COVID positive and who was COVID negative, who'd been exposed, anything like that, versus the recovery room. we knew exactly what your COVID status was the second you entered because you'd already had testing done days previously. So it was a little bit of a nice break that way, but it still lent itself to, the worry and the stress of everything. So it got bad enough to a point where I finally reached out for help. Thankfully, we had a lot of psychotherapists coming forward early on to volunteer their services, which was so lovely. Probably racked up about $3,000 worth of free therapy, which was so needed. And it was the first time that I'd really spent time on myself, spent time on my mental health, and, finally reached out for antidepressants and took time to look at, well, what makes me happy? Why am I doing all this for everybody else? And it's very obviously got me to this spot right now, but I'm not happy. I'm not sleeping. I'm exhausted. I'm snapping at my kids. I'm snapping at my coworkers. I'm starting to have kind of some ideas that maybe aren't the most healthy about, next steps and kind of very generally circling around that. So it got to the point where the Canadian government actually gave full-time workers who were working frontline $5,000 each, which sounds like a lot of money, but then we were taxed heavily on it because Canada. And so we saw maybe $2,200 of that money. And so my husband and I were talking about it, and he goes, "What are you going to spend your money on?" I said, "Well, I'm going to spend it on the most ridiculous thing that I can possibly think of, which was psychic classes." So I had a friend who is a psychic medium, and so she was doing these classes, and I'm like, honestly, it's an excuse to hang out with her and really put some time away from me. And it really started a journey of, well, who's going to make me happy? Well, nobody's going to make me happy. It's my job to make me happy. And so with that came finally being very picky about what I spent my time on. So, were there friends on Facebook who were really kind of sucking my soul dry and had very different viewpoints from mine and really just triggered me? I blocked them or I got rid of them. Was hanging out with family more stressful than not? Yes, it was. Okay, well, we're going to try and minimize those interactions and, looking at things that made me happy. And so writing made me very, very happy. And so when I sat down and started to write my book, it just was this thing where, these stories just poured out of me. And the book took 6 weeks to write, which is exceedingly fast in many respects. But, it was just one of these things where it was 17 or 16 years worth of ER stories waiting to come out, and then being able to tie all of it together with intuition and trusting your gut and really making your wellness first and foremost, and kind of identifying various beliefs that really weren't good for you. So in the ER or in the nursing world kind of belief system, you're not a good nurse unless you give all of yourself to everybody else and leave nothing for you. You're not a good mom if you don't spend every waking minute with your children. You're not a good mom if you're not making things from scratch and taking photos and making memories 24/7, 365. It's all these stereotypes and other people's expectations that really I found were putting a lot of pressure on me. So I kind of stood up and I said, you know what? If you want to call this my villain era, this is going to be it. I'm just going to put my foot down. I'm going to carve out time for me. Even my husband kind of said, "Oh, well, that's really selfish that you're putting yourself first." I said, you know what? Instead of that, how about, if mom's not happy, nobody's happy. Right? Like nobody wants to be yelled at by me. Nobody wants to be, told that nothing's being done right, or you're not moving fast enough, or you're not going to school fast enough, or you're not eating enough greens or veggies or whatever. It's a matter of, if I'm happy, then I've got empathy for more things and more people, and it makes me enjoy life more. So I want to spend time with my kids, even if they're being absolutely insane and running around like maniacs, I can find a little bit more enjoyment out of that than I would if I was completely burnt out to a crisp. So it was just one of those moments where writing led me to be able to really put my foot down and say, no, now it's my time. I've done enough for others. Now it's time for me. And that's kind of what started all of this.
Thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey with us. And there are so many things in there to unpack. So many things that we can talk about. And one thing that really strikes me is sort of that pushback when we actually notice that something is wrong and something just isn't lining up for us, and maybe even our health is suffering at that point already. We often still get pushback from other people saying, well, you can't put your feet up now. That's really lazy. Or who do you think you are taking time off? And that strikes me just as so unhealthy in itself when we do receive that pushback. So how did you deal with that, especially because this was in your very close relationship that this was happening? And so how did you work with that? How did you work around that or work with your husband on that so that any kind of, I don't know if you felt guilty or anything came up at that moment, but how did you work with those kind of feelings?
To be fair, it was anger first and foremost. It was just like, you know what? Like, do you know what I'm dealing with on a daily basis? Like, he's also in the hospital. I'm like, so you should understand what I'm dealing with and the sacrifices I've had to make so that this can work. So, me going to recovery room, that allowed me to then theoretically work day shift, because once the kids got back to school, we had staggered shift starts. So I couldn't do the 7 a.m. start, but I could do the 9 a.m. start. I could do the 10 and the 12 and the 2 and the 4. And, I could do all those things. So it really opened up doors, but that was on me to figure out. So realizing that, a lot of how our family works and how the day-to-day things get done, well, it revolves around me. So, did we go to counseling? Absolutely. Did I fire my marriage counselor? Absolutely, I did. She was recommended. Actually, she was his therapist first and then ended up working with both of us, which I think was flag number one. Flag number two was, she never once kind of said, well, how can Trevor change his daily routine to kind of fit me? Not once ever. So that was flag number two. And then flag number three was when like intimacy came up and why relations weren't really happening. She had said, oh, well, you're going to be uncomfortable with that, but you're just going to have to push through it. I'm like, pardon me. Like, no, absolutely not. This is not happening. So she was very quickly, I lost it. And so it ended up kind of, having a common enemy tends to bring you a bit closer. So when she had said that and Trevor and I got off the call afterwards, and I just lit. And I kind of said to him, I'm like, look, I am furious. I am absolutely steaming right now. This is not about you. This is about her. So I'm sorry that you're the one having to sit here and listen to it, but I'm going to go off. And I, for 45 minutes, like yelled how, any female could tell another female that, oh, you just need to push through being uncomfortable to be intimate with your husband. You're like, pardon me? Like, there's obviously a reason why that's not happening. So why don't we deal with that issue versus, oh, just give it up kind of thing. It was a huge kind of red flag. So we ended up talking more actually about, okay, well, why aren't things happening? And why was that such a hot button issue? And all these things. So it actually, for as much as it was a really crappy professional move, it ended up opening a lot of conversations. And, the COVID was hard on everybody and a lot of marriages did not make it. And we were close. We were really, really close to not making it. But, looking at it, it was like, well, half the problem is me. I am miserable. I am depressed. I am not enjoying things. I am starting to think about life without you in it. So, let me fix those things first, and then we can try and fix us kind of thing. So it's taken a really long time to get back to a place where there's trust and open communication and things of that nature. But it's not easy. It is a struggle, and it's hard because two parents and the end of the day's there and the kids' bedtime's a disaster every single night. And so, you finally get to bed and you're both conked out before you even realize. So it's trying to find things to do together that we actually enjoy. It's trying to find time without kids, which really is hard when we don't have a lot of family support that's nearby and no daycare support. It's hard to just not want to sleep. So thinking about it and putting myself first, really, yes, it was for me first and foremost. It was for me, but it was also for us in the long term. But it was hard to get to that point and to be comfortable to kind of push back with him to say, like, this isn't a selfish decision. This is, me being aware of my mental health. And, you're going to have to look at your idea as to what you think I need to be doing on a daily basis so that this isn't being selfish kind of thing. This isn't a selfish move. So it's taken a long time to get back to a point where we can talk a little bit more openly. We're kind of looking forward to seeing each other. There are always going to be ups and downs. Same with burnout. There's always going to be ups and downs. But it's the same thing in the relationship burnout as it is with the physical burnout, where if you can really try to pick up on when things are shifting down to catch them before they get so low that, it's really hard to turn back.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. It's very brave of you to share that openly, because I feel like a lot of listeners may have experienced a similar thing in their own relationships. And these are hard things to talk about and really hard things to look at. I do feel like one of the pieces that you were touching on is definitely communication, and maybe learning how to communicate again, or finding that path of communicating with your partner or spouse to actually express like what is going on and what it is that you need. And that brings me to the second part that you touched on, listening to yourself. I feel like that is a huge piece that many people are very scared of, this listening to our intuition and what we need, and then voicing that to our coworkers or our partners or spouses. So how does intuition tie into all of this for you? How did that tie into your own experience of burnout, and where do you feel that piece fits in there?
Yeah, great question. It's one of those things that, we as women take for granted because it's just so built into our everyday experience. You're walking into a room and there's somebody there and you've never met them before. And it's just like, creep factor. Like you just get that immediate kind of sinking feeling where things aren't right or things aren't as they seem. And you're just a little bit more wary of it. And, it's a superpower to be able to not only realize that it's happening, because it's happening all the time. It's just a matter of whether or not you're listening to it. And then the next thing is, are you going to act on it? If you're walking into a room, a guy's a creep factor, whatever, do you necessarily need to interact with them? No, potentially you do. So then you just keep it very professional and, to kind of keep your distance and all that kind of things, all the things to keep you safe. It's the exact same thing, during burnout. Once you realize that burnout, you kind of lose yourself in the fact that you're so caught up with everybody else's expectations and opinions, and you lose yourself. Like it's not, nobody really talks about how much you lose yourself during burnout, because it's that physical depression, it's the mental depression, it's all these things where you're just overwhelmed so quickly, and you get overwhelmed quickly, but yet it was just a very insidious process to get to that point. The daily grind, the daily buildup, things start slipping away and you're not noticing. Did I used to, walk on the treadmill almost every day? Yeah, I did. Did I, talk to friends and family all the time? Sure, I did. I used to enjoy cooking. I used to sleep really well. I used to do all these things. And it wasn't until I finally got to that point of having thoughts of not being here, and you're going, oh, that is not normal. That is a huge red flag. Oh my God. Okay. And you flip out a bit because you're like, oh, haven't been here before, or it's been a really, really long time since I've been here. And, the flip or the switch finally gets flipped where you go, okay, now I got to do something. And you just hope that it's at a point where you can come out of it. And it's like breakups almost, where they tell you, to come out of the breakup and to grieve the relationship. It's roughly half the amount of time that you were in it. So, dating in high school, it was like the relationship was 2 months long. You're like, oh my God, I'm gonna, it's gonna be forever before I move on. And before you know it, somebody else is in your life and you're just off and running. And it's kind of the same thing with burnout, where how long is it really taking you to get to that point? Nursing specifically, I was probably already at 75% capacity of where I should have been. Just with the last 10 years of nursing before COVID hit, you're not quite yourself. You're giving up sleep a little bit here and there. You're not eating as well as you should be. You're definitely not working out because you're like, oh, all I do is run around like a chicken with my head cut off for 12 hours. So I'm just gonna lay down on the couch and dick around on my phone for as long as I can. And you start cutting corners. And of course, the corners are always being cut of things you need. I need my sleep. Well, but the kids are staying up and somebody's sick. And guess who's mom's usually the first one to be taking the kids to the doctor or walk-in clinic, or heaven forbid, the emergency department. And the excuse always was, well, if the kids have got a doctor's appointment, well, I work Monday to Friday, 8 to 4, so I can't take them. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm taking them. There's a lot of things that fall on moms as primary parent. And that's, again, it's another thing that we don't really look at. We just kind of accept. And so pushing back and saying like, no, like you need, like, when was last time you did XYZ with the kids? Or when was last time you cooked dinner? Or when was last time that you cleaned up the kitchen? Really taking a really hard look at what I'm doing on the daily versus what you're doing. And again, still continues to this day to be an ongoing debate as to like, well, I mow the lawn. You can mow the lawn once every 2 weeks. I am doing the daily stuff, and it's the daily stuff that's invisible until somebody's not doing it. And then suddenly, oh, look at that. Oh, the laundry's, piling up, or the kitchen's a disaster. Or, oh, there's nothing in the fridge. Well, guess what? That's because mom went on strike. Mom went on strike just for a couple of days just to see what would happen. And sure enough, is it a little bit of a tactic? Absolutely. Can it be used as a bargaining chip? Absolutely. We've had points where we actually kept track of who was doing what there for a bit. And, oh, well, I did the laundry. I'm like, you put the laundry in and you ran it. Did you put it into the dryer? No. Did you put it into the basket afterwards? No. Did you put it away? No. So don't tell me you did the laundry just because you only put it in the washing machine. That's not doing the laundry. And I've already sorted it too, also, by the way. So all you had to do was take the basket, shove it into the washer, and put the basket back. And that was it. So, not to say that it's an easygoing kind of thing, but knowing that nobody likes to be criticized. Nobody likes to know or have brought to them what they're missing, and I'm the exact same way. My husband, oh, well, you play around on your phone too much. Yeah, I know that. I do know that. And, the kids are starting to make remarks. Okay, I know that. I get it. However, I'm also, an ER nurse. I'm also a small business owner. So it's hard to take that away. Am I currently thinking about deleting the 2 games that I have on my phone because I mess around too much on them? Yes. that's on the table. It's in my mind. I know that it's a problem. So might just have to, take a step back from those two. But it's hard when you rationalize that, well, that's how I relax. I just like to goof around on games, and that's how I de-stress from the day, and blah, blah, blah. So it's just one of those things where it's chaos, and you have to just realize that that's sometimes what happens. So everybody's different. Everybody's going to have their own ways of communicating and knowing the best times to communicate. But it's hard, and it's an ongoing issue. And communication is by far like our biggest lacking point for sure.
I feel like it's sometimes hard to communicate when both parties are really worn out and you have lots to do. Finding those right words and being patient and empathetic and supportive, all the things that are supposed to happen. It can be so tough in those circumstances, especially if you kind of chronic sleep deprivation and you're constantly drawing on that for your work. So yeah, we find ways to cope and ways to try and balance how that stress affects us through games or other things. And that's our way of trying to decompress a little bit. So yeah, that makes sense to me. And the point comes when people realize there's no magical household fairy when you go on strike, which is always kind of
love
fun.
Going on strike. It's just one of those things where, there was definitely a point where I was only putting away my laundry. Yeah. And then his sat. And guess what? It sat there for weeks and he did not notice. So I'm like, you know what? Some things got to change. And so when he finally did notice, I said, oh, well, that's nice. He's like, well, this basket's been sitting here for forever. I'm like, and what were you going to do about it? He goes, well, I don't know where things go. I'm like, that's weaponizing competence. You absolutely know exactly where things go. You've been living in the same household as I am for the last 15 years. You know exactly where things go. So don't. Yeah. So sometimes, it's getting to that point of no more and, getting to the point of saying I was done. And it was only after saying I was done and I was ready to walk away and, made all the plans to walk away. It was a tough week where we separated and very quickly the tune changed. And I'm like, why is this only happening? Oh, and I threatened to leave. Kind of makes you wish you would have done it sooner instead of doing all this in the meantime.
Yeah. And there's that communication again to try and pull that together. And you actually also found another way to cope, which is writing. And you wrote a book in a very miraculous 6 weeks. So tell us about your book. Tell us what it's called and then tell us what it is about and how that ties into your journey with burnout.
Yeah. So Nursing Intuition, How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Career, obviously was born out of COVID and this trauma journal idea. But it's a way for both new grads as well as, nurses getting their first couple of years in to really realize that we do use nursing intuition. And not only is it evidence-based, but it's science at this point. So now that we've finally got the science to back us up, we really need to look at, teaching it and bringing it in instead of it being a hushed 3 a.m. conversation where, you're going, oh, I don't know if that guy in 6 is really doing so well. My gut's telling me that things are not going in the right direction and being able to then voice that opinion to both coworkers as well as physicians and learning how to advocate. Sometimes it can involve the use of, my gut's saying. Other times you kind of have to go a little bit around it, depending on who you're talking to. Say, I just don't know. And I'm just wondering if I could get your opinion and could you have a second look at and this kind of thing where you're just being very aware of who you're talking to and how well your relationship is with them and being able to still advocate for your patient, which without potentially saying, this is why I think that something's off. It's just another way to get around it and still have your patient, come out better on the other side. So the science says that even if you're thinking that the patient's sicker than they are, you tell the physician comes in, assesses that patient. Things aren't nearly as bad as you thought they were. Great, even better. Patient's okay. Just by that physician coming in and having a second look, you're still improving patient outcomes, even if your patient's not nearly as sick. So really trusting your gut and going with it and advocating, it's still a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually sounds like we could apply this in many other places in our lives, not just nursing work, because there are so many places in our personal and professional lives that kind of listening to that inner voice and trusting our intuition, I think it could be very helpful, especially also when we're talking about our own mental health and our own physical health. So I love that you wrote this book and that these are available for people. So to wrap it up, tell us, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to work with you or they'd like to find your book? Where and how can they get in touch with you and what do you offer?
Yeah, so I offer a bunch of journals, mainly directed at nurses, but also some paramedic journals, as well as some journals for heart patients to keep track of your symptoms, to be able to then report better to your physician. If you want to find me, Instagram and TikTok, I'm at ernurse.jenn, Jenn. You can find me on LinkedIn at Jennifer Johnson, BSCNRN. And my website is www.rx4growth.com. And you can find everything there. And you can also search me up on Amazon and find everything there too.
Sounds wonderful. And we will be linking to all of Jenn's offering in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for coming on today and spending this time with me and really being so open and vulnerable and raw about the realities of burnout and what that looks like. So thank you for sharing that with me and with the listeners. I truly appreciate it. And thanks for coming on today, Jenn.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Take care.
See you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.